November 7, 1944. The 3rd Armored Division Maintenance Depot in Stolberg, Germany, housed a disabled Sherman tank, its transmission utterly ruined. Officially declared a complete mechanical write-off, the M4A3, serial number 305-18724, had experienced a catastrophic final drive failure for the 3rd occasion in 2 months. This was a prevalent issue plaguing Shermans during the harsh German winter. Most technicians would have simply completed the necessary paperwork and moved on. However, Technical Sergeant Curtis Lee Hammond stood before the derelict vehicle, his expression signaling impending trouble to his fellow mechanics. At 32 years of age, Hammond was a former bootlegger from East Tennessee, whose understanding of engines, gleaned from evading federal agents rather than from any technical manual, far surpassed formal education. "He's about to pull another one of his crazy stunts," Private James Murphy murmured to Corporal David Chen. "Last month, he jury-rigged 3 half-tracks to run on captured German fuel." Hammond turned to his crew, a mischievous grin on his face. "Gentlemen," he announced, his Tennessee drawl thick, "this tank is about to become the quickest Sherman in Europe. I aim to make her outrun a Jeep." A stunned silence, followed by nervous chuckles, rippled through the group. Shermans tipped the scales at 33 tons and struggled to reach 26 miles per hour, while Jeeps could hit 65. Hammond's proposal seemed utterly unattainable. "Sergeant," Chen ventured cautiously, "that's mechanically impossible. The drivetrain simply can't handle that kind of strain. You'd face a court-martial." Hammond's grin widened. "Likely so, but this tank is already destined for the scrap heap. We're losing more armor to mechanical breakdowns than to enemy fire. And I've discovered something about this Continental R975 engine that Detroit never figured out. She's got an extra 200 horsepower just waiting to be unleashed." What none of them knew was that Hammond, through months of clandestine experimentation, had determined the Sherman's powertrain was operating far below its theoretical capabilities. The engine was conservatively rated at 400 horsepower for reliability. However, Hammond, who had spent his youth coaxing improbable power from engines used in his illicit endeavors, understood that such conservatism represented untapped potential. Curtis Hammond's unlikely journey from moonshiner to master mechanic began in March 1942. Apprehended for the 14th time by federal agents, the judge presented him with a stark choice: 5 years in the penitentiary or enlistment in the Army. Hammond chose the latter. Basic training at Fort Knox quickly revealed Hammond's almost preternatural grasp of mechanical systems. He could diagnose engine maladies by sound alone. His instructors recognized his exceptional talent, but were unsettled by his complete disregard for established procedures. Hammond eschewed manuals, explaining, "Manuals are written by folks who never had to make an engine run with revenue agents hot on their tail." By September 1943, Hammond had attained the rank of technical sergeant, despite 17 reprimands for unauthorized modifications and 43 for insubordination. Nevertheless, 3 separate battalion commanders had commended him for ensuring their units remained operational through his unconventional methods. The Normandy campaign brought Hammond face to face with a brutal reality. The 3rd Armored Division landed on Omaha Beach on June 23, 1944. The true adversary, he realized, was not enemy ordnance, but mechanical failure. Shermans were constantly breaking down. For every tank lost to enemy action, 2 more were rendered inoperable by mechanical defects. Hammond ceased adhering strictly to procedures and focused solely on keeping tanks functional. If parts were unavailable, he fabricated them. If manuals deemed repairs impossible, he accomplished them anyway. Most controversially, he began modifying engines to extract greater power. Examining the Continental R975, Hammond noted its striking resemblance to aircraft engines capable of producing up to 550 horsepower. The discrepancy, he deduced, lay in tuning, not fundamental design. Through covert late-night experiments on tanks already slated for decommissioning, he proved his hypothesis. A Sherman that typically mustered a top speed of 26 miles per hour was suddenly reaching 32. Its acceleration improved dramatically. Captain Robert Morrison confronted him in September 1944. "Sergeant Hammond," Morrison stated sternly, "you've been making unauthorized modifications that contravene regulations. They void warranties and could potentially jeopardize operational reliability." Hammond responded with his characteristic calm. "Sir, those warranties mean little when we're losing tanks to mechanical failures. I'm not compromising reliability, I'm enhancing it. Those engines are detuned so far below their capacity that they're actually less dependable." Morrison struggled for a retort. Hammond's modified tanks were demonstrably outperforming standard models without any increase in failures. "I cannot officially sanction this," Morrison conceded finally, "but I won't interfere as long as it proves effective. However, if Division Command becomes aware, you will face a court-martial. Understood?" "Crystal clear, sir," Hammond confirmed. Now, in November 1944, Hammond contemplated a feat far more ambitious than any of his previous endeavors. He intended to fundamentally redefine the capabilities of a Sherman tank. Over a period of 6 weeks, working diligently through the nights, Hammond systematically overhauled serial number 305-18724. He boosted the engine's compression ratio from 6.7 to 8.5 by machining the cylinder heads. He adapted the carburetor, incorporating jets from a captured German aircraft. He advanced the ignition timing by 8 degrees. Most controversially, he modified the supercharger, increasing its boost pressure by 20%. To cope with the surge in power, Hammond reinforced the transmission, utilizing steel salvaged from a destroyed Panther tank. He altered the gear ratios to achieve higher speeds. The final drives were strengthened with additional plating. The suspension benefited from heavier springs sourced from M10 tank destroyers and modified shock absorbers. By December 20th, the transformed Sherman was ready for its moment of truth. The initial test run commenced at 2 o'clock in the morning on December 21st. Hammond assembled a volunteer crew, Murphy as the driver, Chen as the assistant driver, Jackson as the gunner, and Foster as the loader, with Hammond at the command. The Continental engine roared to life, emitting a deeper, more aggressive rumble than before. Murphy engaged the transmission and accelerated. At 20 miles per hour, they surpassed the standard Sherman's capabilities. At 25, they exceeded its official maximum speed. Murphy's grin widened. "Sergeant, she's still pulling strong. Keep pushing it," Hammond commanded. At 35 miles per hour, Murphy's grin morphed into an expression of utter astonishment. At 40, they were entering Jeep territory. At 45, Chen exclaimed, "Sergeant, the engine temperature is elevated, but within acceptable limits. Oil pressure is good. This engine is happy." At 47 miles per hour, they passed the designated timing marker. Murphy applied the brakes. The crew sat in stunned silence. Then, Murphy burst into laughter. "We just hit 47 in a Sherman tank. Nobody's going to believe this." Hammond meticulously inspected every component: track tension, suspension, engine. Everything appeared normal. He had successfully engineered a Sherman capable of outrunning a Jeep. 3 days later, serial number 305-18724, affectionately nicknamed Moonshine Runner, received orders to join the Divisional Reserve. The Battle of the Bulge had erupted on December 16th, and every available tank was desperately needed. Morrison confronted Hammond. "Sergeant, the division requires every operational tank. That modified tank of yours is included, isn't it?" "Yes, sir." "If it fails in combat," Morrison warned, "I'll ensure you spend the rest of your life in Leavenworth. However, If it saves lives, I'll put you in for a medal. The tank goes to war, and so do you. If you find this narrative of unauthorized innovation compelling, please consider subscribing to the channel. We uncover incredible, untold stories from World War II that highlight how individual ingenuity made a decisive difference. Hit subscribe for more captivating historical deep dives each week. Hammond assembled his crew. Murphy remained the driver, and Chen the assistant driver. He recruited seasoned veterans, Johnson as gunner and O'Brien as loader. Christmas Eve was dedicated to preparing the Moonshine Runner. They loaded 975 75mm rounds, thousands of machine gun cartridges, replenished the fuel tanks, and conducted thorough system checks. By midnight, they were combat ready. On Christmas morning, the 3rd Armored Division began its southward movement. The weather was brutally cold, dipping below 20 degrees Fahrenheit. The column advanced slowly along icy roads. On December 27th, near the town of Houten, Belgium, the Moonshine Runner's moment arrived. A German armored thrust had breached American lines, threatening to cut off 2 infantry regiments. The Moonshine Runner was part of a contingent of 16 tanks ordered to intercept. Intelligence indicated the presence of at least 12 Panthers, self-propelled guns, and motorized infantry. The Americans were outnumbered and outgunned. While the Panthers boasted superior armor, firepower, and optics, the Germans were unaware they would face a Sherman that moved with unprecedented agility. The American tanks deployed into an ambush formation. Hammond specifically requested the Moonshine Runner be positioned on the extreme flank, as his strategy relied heavily on mobility. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the German forces appeared approximately 800 yards away. The ambush was sprung. 16 Shermans opened fire. The lead Panther sustained 3 hits and ground to a halt. The second Panther's 88mm gun fired once. An American Sherman erupted in flames. Within 3 minutes, 4 American tanks were burning. 2 Panthers were disabled. The Americans were losing the engagement, fighting the Panthers on terms dictated by the enemy. Hammond assessed the situation coolly. A different approach was imperative. "Murphy," Hammond spoke into the intercom. "Remember how fast this girl moves?" "How could I forget, Sergeant?" Murphy replied. "Good. We're flanking this entire position at full speed. This is going to get interesting." Murphy did not hesitate. He slammed the accelerator to the floor. The Moonshine Runner leaped forward, its modified engine roaring. The 33-ton tank accelerated with astonishing alacrity. The German commanders noticed the solitary Sherman, but initially dismissed it as a suicidal charge. Multiple Panthers traversed their turrets to engage. However, something was amiss. The Sherman was moving with impossible speed, accelerating like a much lighter vehicle. At 30 miles per hour, the Moonshine Runner was traveling faster than the Panthers could track. German gunners found their shots going wide as their target accelerated beyond their turret's traverse speed. At 35 miles per hour, the Sherman was a blur, streaking across the flank at a velocity that defied conventional understanding for a vehicle of its size. Hammond's plan was deceptively simple. The fastest vehicle usually wins. He eschewed direct engagement at medium range, opting instead to use speed to reach the vulnerable rear of the German tanks. In 90 seconds, the Moonshine Runner covered 1,200 yards, circling the German positions at speeds that left Panther commanders unable to react. Several fired at the racing Sherman, but hitting a target moving at over 35 miles per hour proved impossible. The Moonshine Runner emerged behind the German column, where the Panther's armor was thinnest. "Halt!" Hammond commanded. "Gunner, 3 Panthers, rear aspect, 400 to 600 yards, make every shot count." Johnson, the veteran gunner, traversed smoothly, acquired the nearest Panther, and fired. The armor-piercing round struck the engine deck, penetrating the thin plating. The German tank stopped. Its crew bailed out. Johnson traversed to the second target and fired. achieving another penetration. This Panther exploded, its turret dislodging. The third Panther attempted to traverse its turret, but Johnson fired first, securing another kill. In 30 seconds, the Moonshine Runner had neutralized 3 Panthers. The psychological impact was devastating. The Germans, suddenly taking fire from an unexpected and impossible position, with a tank appearing directly in their rear, lost cohesion. Their advance stalled and then reversed. The American tanks pressed their advantage. The battle raged for another 20 minutes. 8 Panthers were destroyed, 3 of them by the Moonshine Runner. 4 more were disabled. American losses amounted to 6 Shermans. Hammond assessed the Moonshine Runner's condition. The violent maneuvers had subjected it to tremendous stress, but the modifications held firm. Engine temperature remained elevated but acceptable. Oil pressure was good. The transmission performed flawlessly. The tank had accomplished the impossible and survived. News of the exploit spread rapidly. By evening, Hammond was summoned to division headquarters, fully expecting a court-martial. Instead, Brigadier General Doyle Hickey reviewed the after-action reports. "Sergeant Hammond," Hickey began, "commanders report your Sherman moved at impossible speeds. German prisoners insist they encountered a new supertank. I am also informed you have made unauthorized modifications. Explain." Hammond responded with unwavering honesty. "Sir, I have improved tank performance through modifications to compression, fuel delivery, supercharger boost, and ignition timing. I have reinforced transmissions. These actions violate regulations, but they are effective. How much faster?" "A standard Sherman tops out at 26 miles per hour, sir. Mine reached 45 to 48. They accelerate more rapidly, climb better, and maintain speed over rough terrain. The modifications cost $72 per tank. Installation takes 4 days. And reliability? They're more reliable, sir. The Continental engine is over-engineered for 400 horsepower. It's happier producing 450 to 500. These engines last longer when operating at their optimal design point." Hickey made a swift decision. "Officially, I know nothing about this. Officially, you face court-martial if this fails. Unofficially, train mechanics in your procedures. We are modifying 20 tanks as a test program. Captain Morrison will provide the necessary resources. Any questions?" "What shall I call this officially, sir?" Hammond inquired. Hickey smiled. Tank Performance Enhancement Program. Over the next 6 weeks, Hammond trained 8 mechanics in the modification procedures. The training was hands-on, with Hammond overseeing every step. Each modification was meticulously documented: engine removal, cylinder head machining, carburetor modification, ignition advancement, supercharger modification, transmission reinforcement, final drive strengthening, and suspension upgrading. By mid-February 1945, 20 modified tanks were completed and distributed throughout the 3rd Armored Division. Hammond rode along on several combat missions, monitoring their performance. The feedback was universally positive. Drivers lauded the acceleration and speed. Commanders appreciated the increased tactical flexibility. The modified tanks excelled in rapid response to threats, flanking maneuvers, and extricating themselves from unfavorable engagements. Mechanical reliability matched Hammond's promises. The modified tanks averaged 1,500 miles between failures, a figure comparable to standard Shermans. The cost-benefit analysis was compelling. $72 and 4 days of labor yielded a 35% improvement in mobility. Hammond's modifications represented an incremental enhancement that accumulated into a significant strategic advantage. Requests for modifications began pouring in from other units, but Hammond recognized that his procedures required skilled mechanics with a profound understanding of the work. Less experienced attempts frequently resulted in failures. In March 1945, Hammond briefed the Army Ground Forces headquarters in Paris. 2 colonels, a brigadier general, and 3 Ordnance Department engineers attended. Hammond presented his work with confidence, detailing the theoretical basis, combat data from 43 missions, and the procedures, addressing every potential concern. Ordnance civilians remained skeptical, adamantly asserting that the Continental engine could not safely produce the claimed power. "With all due respect, gentlemen," Hammond responded, "I'm not claiming. I'm presenting data from 3 months of combat. You are telling me what the engine cannot do. I am showing you what it has already done. There is a difference between theory and reality." Brigadier General Thomas Rodri intervened. "The sergeant has a valid point. We can debate theory endlessly, but he possesses combat evidence. I propose official tests at the Aberdeen Proving Ground. If the modifications perform as claimed, we will implement them. If they fail, we will cease all efforts." 2 weeks later at Aberdeen, official testers subjected a modified Sherman to exhaustive trials. 3 days were dedicated to measurement and analysis. The results fully validated Hammond's claims. Top speed was verified at 46.2 miles per hour. Acceleration from 0 to 30 miles per hour was achieved in 23 seconds, compared to 41 seconds for a standard model. Hill climbing capabilities improved by 37%. A 500-meter endurance test was completed without any failures. The official test report, dated April 9, 1945, concluded that Hammond's modifications represented a significant combat enhancement at minimal cost and with acceptable reliability. It recommended immediate implementation across the European theater. Authorization came on April 15 from Supreme Headquarters. All maintenance companies were officially permitted to perform Hammond's modifications, designated the Enhanced Mobility Program, though tankers colloquially referred to them as Hammond tanks or Moonshine Specials. By May 8th, the day Germany surrendered, over 300 Shermans had undergone the modifications. Units equipped with modified tanks reported a 23% reduction in losses. Modified tanks averaged 1.7 enemy kills compared to 1.1 for standard Shermans. Before we continue with the lasting legacy of this remarkable story, if you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that button now. These accounts of American ingenuity deserve to be widely shared and remembered. Join our community by subscribing today. Following the war, Army studies confirmed that Hammond's modifications embodied precisely the kind of field innovation that should be actively encouraged. Continental Motors dispatched engineers to interview Hammond. The engineers were reportedly chagrined. A self-taught mechanic had identified performance potential that they, with all their formal training, had overlooked. Several of Hammond's modifications were subsequently incorporated into post-war designs. The company extended an offer to Hammond for a consulting position. He declined, stating he had had his fill of engines. Technical Sergeant Curtis Hammond received the Bronze Star in May 1945. The citation acknowledged his innovations, but notably omitted any mention of unauthorized modifications. He was promoted to Master Sergeant and honorably discharged in November 1945. Hammond returned to Tennessee, not to his former illicit trade, but to open a small garage in Gatlinburg, specializing in engine rebuilding and modifications. He lived a quiet life, rarely discussing his wartime service. He married in 1947, raised 3 children, and continued working until his retirement in 1979. In 1983, military historian Dr. Robert Zaloga, while researching declassified records, discovered Hammond's story. He contacted Hammond and meticulously documented the modification program. Zaloga's subsequent book dedicated an entire chapter to Hammond's groundbreaking work. Hammond attended a 3rd Armored Division reunion in 1985, his first contact with former colleagues in 40 years. Dozens of tankers credited their survival to his modifications. Men lined up, expressing their gratitude. One former commander remarked, "Your modifications saved my crew twice." Once, when we outran 3 Panthers, and again when we reached a vital bridge just before the Germans could blow it. His technical legacy extended far beyond the conclusion of World War II. Field modifications based on combat experience became standard doctrine. Later tank designs incorporated higher power margins. Hammond's pragmatic approach, test it, modify it, and disregard rules if they prove ineffective, became deeply embedded in American military culture. Curtis Hammond passed away on March 17, 1992, at the age of 79. His obituary mentioned his military service but offered few specific details. At his modest private funeral, over 50 elderly men appeared, former tankers who had traveled from across the country. One frail man approached Hammond's widow. "Ma'am," he said, his voice trembling, "your husband saved my life. I was 19, driving a Sherman, terrified because German tanks were superior. Then I was assigned Curtis's modified tank. The first time I experienced its speed, I knew I had a fighting chance. That speed saved me 3 times. I got to come home, have children, and grandchildren, because Curtis figured out how to make a tank faster." Hammond's widow was moved to tears. These first-hand accounts revealed a dimension of her husband she had only glimpsed. The quiet mechanic had profoundly altered armored warfare and, in doing so, saved hundreds of lives. In 2003, the National World War II Museum acquired one of the few surviving Hammond-modified Shermans. Curators meticulously restored it to running condition, preserving all of Hammond's original modifications. The restored tank was demonstrated in 2004 with former veterans in attendance. When the modified engine roared to life and the vehicle accelerated to speeds that still seemed impossible for a Sherman, old soldiers smiled and some wept. They were witnessing history brought back to life. The museum exhibit features extensive documentation, including technical drawings, photographs, and numerous testimonials. A placard prominently reads, "Technical Sergeant Curtis Hammond increased Sherman tank speed by over 70% while maintaining reliability through unauthorized experimentation and sheer stubborn determination." His work exemplifies American field innovation and the principle that the best solutions sometimes emerge from those closest to the problem. Hammond's story prompts profound contemplation on innovation, authority, and expertise. He possessed no engineering degree, no formal credentials, and no official sanction. However, he commanded deep practical knowledge, a fearless empirical approach, and unwavering confidence in his observations over received wisdom. His moonshining background proved to be perfect preparation, demanding the maximization of engine performance with limited resources and fostering the confidence to proceed, despite authorities insisting he was wrong. The narrative illuminates the inherent tension between innovation and regulation. Regulations are established for valid reasons, but rigid adherence can stifle progress. The Army's response evolved appropriately. Initially skeptical, their eventual support demonstrated a crucial institutional flexibility that represented American military culture at its finest. Every tanker whose life was saved by faster acceleration, every crew that escaped the pursuit of Panthers, every returning soldier, empowered by Hammond's innovations, represented the true essence of triumph. Commendations such as the Bronze Star, accounts within history books, or even tanks preserved in museums, though fitting tributes, paled in comparison. The genuine monument lay in the preserved lives and the averted sorrow for countless families. This eccentric engineer, whose modifications enabled Sherman tanks to outpace Jeeps, demonstrated that profound expertise can manifest in myriad ways. The most effective breakthroughs often emerge from unforeseen origins and challenge established paradigms, especially when bolstered by competence and demonstrable success, capable of reshaping the world. Technical Sergeant Curtis Hammond transformed wrecked tanks, defunct engines, and seemingly insurmountable challenges into formidable war machines that contributed to Allied victory. His accomplishments were fueled by a moonshiner's resourcefulness, mechanical prowess, innate intuition, and an unshakable conviction that regulations were mere suggestions when human lives hung in the balance. The Continental engines within those enhanced Shermans, driven by a self-taught mechanic from Tennessee beyond their intended capacities, thundered across Europe in 1945, propelling American armor to triumph. They surged at speeds unenvisioned by designers, with a dependability that defied the calculations of engineers and an efficacy that surpassed the skepticism of critics. Their roar was a testament to Curtis Hammond's understanding, a knowledge that transcended formal engineering education. Every engine harbors untapped potential waiting to be unearthed. Standard performance ratings are merely a starting point, and often, what is universally deemed impossible simply reflects a lack of dedicated effort. The swiftest Sherman tank of World War II, the one that outran a Jeep, the Moonshine Special that revolutionized armored combat, began as a derelict wreck and a daring concept from a mechanic widely regarded as unhinged. Yet, Curtis Hammond proved that what appears as madness can often be unrecognized genius. And sometimes, the most effective approach to an intractable problem is to disregard all pronouncements of impossibility and simply proceed with the construction of the solution. A single damaged tank, a tenacious mechanic, and a speed of 47 miles per hour fundamentally altered the perception of a Sherman's capabilities. This is the enduring legacy of Technical Sergeant Curtis Lee Hammond, the moonshiner from Tennessee, who ingeniously modified his way into military history, saving hundreds of lives by refusing to accept mediocrity as sufficient. In a conflict secured by industrial might, the crucial edge sometimes originated not from the assembly lines of Detroit, but from a humble maintenance tent in Germany. There, a visionary mechanic, guided by moonshiner's instincts, surveyed a damaged tank not for what it was, but for the potent force it could become.